Which are we more likely to find, alien megastructures or alien microbes? Why is the US racing China to the moon? Will mining the asteroid belt ever become a reality? And in Q&A Plus, will we ever make a mega cut video again? All this and more in this question show. It's time for the question show. Your questions, my answers, as always, wherever you are across my channel. If a question pops into your brain, just write it down. I'll gather them up and I will answer them here. All right, let's get into the questions. Paige Potter, do you think we're closer to discovering alien microbes or alien megastructures? It's an interesting question. So on the alien microbes idea, this is the idea of biosignatures, that you would measure the atmosphere of an exoplanet and then you would detect the presence of, methane or ozone or oxygen or some interplay between water vapor and methane and ozone and oxygen in the atmosphere of this planet. And that would tell you that there's life there. There's seasonal cycles. You're seeing the rise and the fall of the methane and the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that tells you that there's life involved. You wouldn't get any more information. You'd be like, there's life on that planet. And that's all we know. Yes or no, there's life in the universe. While a technosignature is very unambiguous. Like, for sure that there is no way that a natural process can create a triangle-shaped space station that is orbiting around a star. And you would even start to learn about some of the capabilities of that civilization based on the kinds of things that you're seeing, or them sending you a message via radio. That would be incredible, right? So on the one hand, it's probably easier technologically, and there's probably more examples of bacterial life on planets around the Milky Way. On the other hand, it's going to be very ambiguous. You're not sure, right? It's inconclusive. You don't know for sure that you've actually detected the presence of aliens on that world. But if you have the technosignature, then the evidence is unambiguous. You know for certain that you have detected the presence of an alien civilization. And in fact, you can maybe even communicate with them or learn information about them. So both are the way. Like, you don't want to choose. So which one do I think we're going to find first? So in my heart, I think the answer is neither. We're going to find neither first. That we won't find either evidence of biology going on in atmospheres, nor will we detect the presence of alien megastructures. But if I had to pick one, probably the biology, probably the bacteria. Like, I think we would probably detect the presence of some kind of biological process that is changing the atmosphere of a world or giving off some kind of waste gas that is a clear indication of a biosignature before we detect some message from another civilization. Probably. Melinda Green, why is the US even racing China to the moon? Didn't we beat them in the 1960s? Well, of course. Right? The first person to set foot on the moon was Neil Armstrong, and that record will stand. First person in space was Yuri Gagarin, right? First person to orbit the Earth. So that record will never be taken away. And whoever, do you remember the name of the first Chinese astronaut? I don't. Oh my God. Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut. That's an accomplishment that, at this point when he first flew in 2003, right, the space shuttle had been flying, that the US and other countries had put hundreds of astronauts into space. And so you just don't remember. And so when the first Chinese astronaut sets foot on the moon, we will celebrate and remember their name. But they didn't beat the Americans to the moon. The Americans beat them by 50 years. So there isn't a race. And yet, I think that this is a narrative that China wants people to see, that they are a true scientific nation, that they are not just the place where you get your cheap toys made and drones, that they are a nation that is capable of doing great things. And one of those great things is going to be sending humans to the moon and bringing them safely home. So they already have people on their own Chinese space station. But then that means that the prize of having the first person to set foot on Mars is still up for grabs. We don't know who the first human is going to be. And I think the Chinese are absolutely in the running for being able to send someone to be the first person to set foot on Mars. Obviously, Elon Musk talks a big game, but let's see those rockets fly. Get going. You've got about a decade to get someone to Mars and safely home before the Chinese will probably try and pull it off. But in my preference, they would be collaborations, right? That any base on the moon, there should be a new version of the International Space Station. It should be a collaboration, that the Chinese and the Americans should be working together, that there should be a collaborative mission that lands on the moon and has Chinese astronauts and Americans or some other country set foot at the same time. That'd be great. And that the base is staffed by an international collaboration. Collaborations make things better. And same thing with the trip to Mars. It's time to shout out all the new $5 patrons and above. Scott Maxwell, Dave Mermenstein, Zebek, Robert Roy, Brian Murphy, George Molnar, Tracy Spinka, Keith, Richard Campbell, and Newt Witchtig. Join the club at patreon.com/universe today. Darth X, is a space station cheaper if communists do it? I think the budget of China is about $6 billion for their annual space exploration budget. I don't know if it's going to change for their lunar budget, but it's about a third of the budget of the United States, of NASA. But they don't accomplish as many things as NASA does. NASA has a bunch of missions in the works, has the human program, has their space station. So, I would say they definitely, in this case, China, has a ton of engineers, ton of scientists. They pay them less than what they're paid in the US. So they're able to get more done, but at a lower budget, but not get more done than, I think the Americans still, NASA still has more hardware that is being produced at the same time than really any other nation. All the other nations combined. Blade Solar. Do you think mining at the asteroid belt will ever be reality? And what is H3, the element that is found on the moon? So the first question, do we think asteroid mining will ever be a reality? So, I think when a lot of people hear the idea of mining asteroids, they think that we're going to mine the asteroids and then bring the material back home to Earth. But that will probably never be economically feasible, that the cost of sending a spacecraft to an asteroid to try and extract the resources and bring them back home is just more expensive than just digging a hole in the ground. That, yes, there is a higher concentration of gold and palladium and platinum and all of these things on asteroids, but the costs of going and getting them are so high that it's never going to make more sense. Where it does make sense is when you use that stuff in space. So we will eventually have factories in space. We will have colonies on the moon and Mars. And to send more material to them, instead of trying to carry that stuff out of the enormous gravity well from Earth, you could send that stuff from an asteroid. And so the amount of energy that's required to send it over there would be much lower. So for the second part of your question, what is H3? That's helium-3. And the standard helium that you put into helium balloons, the stuff that we find here on Earth, is helium-4, which is 2 protons and 2 neutrons. But helium-3 is 2 protons and 1 neutron. And it's incredibly rare. We have tiny little amounts of it mixed in with regular helium here on Earth, but you'd have to extract enormous amounts of helium to try and get even just the tiniest amounts of it. But helium-3 is produced by the sun. So that part of the solar wind contains this helium-3 and it impacts the surface of the moon. And so people have proposed that you could go and dig up the regolith on the surface of the moon to get at the helium-3. So why would you want helium-3? So for fusion reactors, theoretically, helium-3 would allow you to produce a fusion reaction that gives off less radioactive particles while you're running your fusion reaction. So, with the standard fusion reaction, you're going to be putting out a lot of particles that potentially are going to seep into the containment chamber, and you're going to have to sort of be far away from your fusion reactor. But if you want to make a very small reactor, or you want something that's on your spaceship, then helium-3 might be a good way to go. Now, the problem, of course, is here we are in the year 2026, and no sustained fusion reaction has been developed. Fusion is always, 25, 30 years off. People are working on it in a bunch of different ways, but we'd have to go through standard kind of deuterium fusion, tritium fusion, and then maybe later on someone can figure out helium-3 fusion. And then if that's the case, then maybe there is a resource on the moon that is valuable enough for us to mine it and bring it home to Earth. But even that seems, that there's still helium-3 can be found in other pockets here on Earth. Go Lord. If an amateur uses Vera Rubin data to find Planet 9, do they get to name it? No. So if you, and so this is something that I'm not entirely clear upon, which is that if you use Vera Rubin to find an asteroid, you probably get to name it. You get to name it after whatever you want. As long as it is appropriate. If you find a comet, the comet will probably be named after Vera Rubin, but maybe you will get your name in it as well. But if you find Planet 9, that will be named by the International Astronomical Union. However, you will get a vote. So when you had like Eris, which was named by Mike Brown, it was ratified by the IAU, but he had proposed the name. And so you could do the same thing. You can propose the name, and then the IAU will ratify that name if it's not, Dwarfy McDwarfface. Did you know you can watch the same video with no ads and get a bonus question over on Patreon completely for free? We call it Q&A Plus. This week's bonus question: will we ever make a mega cut video again? And I'll put a link in the show notes. All right, those are the questions that we had this episode. Thank you, everyone who asked your questions into the YouTube comments, everybody who joined me for the live show. I'm going to continue talking about my movie list, but first, I'd like to thank our patrons. Thanks to Abe Kingston, Andrea Pedretti, Brian Bodie, Caroline, Chuck Hawkins, Commander Balick, Dark Finger, David Gilton, and David Matz, and Thrall Reading and Math for Toddlers, Evan.Pro, James Clark, Jeremy Madden, Jim Burke, Marcel, Smitzelbuck, Marcel, NASA Ocean Guy, Nordspace, OneStepFanimals.org. Please follow my nephew at VBrick6994, Ring Kaidu, Richard Williams, Sean Sargent, Stephen Friendly Monthly, Team 49, Telescopes Cannon, Vlad Zeppelin, Wolfgang Klotz, Zelda, Fraser, blink twice if Otto is making you deny the aliens, who support us at the Master of the Universe level, and all our patrons. All your support means the universe to us. So earlier this week, I talked about my top 100 movies list. And again, I'll put a link down in the show notes. You can go access that post where you see the full 105-ish movies that make my top 100 list. Sci-fi, which some are not sci-fi and are space. But anyway, I am in the process of going through every single one of the videos in that list to make sure to double verify that my nostalgic memories are correct and that it is still a good movie. So next up, I've got 12 Monkeys, which I've been on a sort of Terry Gilliam kick. So we've watched all of the Monty Python movies, watched Brazil, and then I watched 12 Monkeys. And it's good, but it's not as great as I remembered it being. The Terry Gilliam stuff is wonderful. The sort of weird machines in the future and the time travel stuff is fine. But then for the actual sci-fi parts of it, it's actually a fairly bland romance adventure story, and that part I sort of didn't like as much. When you look at something like Brazil, it's just so weird and so great. 12 Monkeys has bits that are weird, but parts that aren't as great, and I kind of liked weird, but it stays on the list. Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and we're watching sort of all of the Planet of the Apes movies, and they're wonderful. The first one is pretty good. The second one is really excellent. The third one is good. The fourth one is fine, but they definitely deserve to be on the list. What can you say? So Rise of the Planet of the Apes, it stays on the list. Now, in addition to the movies that are on the list, I had a lot of people make recommendations to movies that should be on the list. And so one of the ones that I got was Snowpiercer. And I had originally not put Snowpiercer on the list. And Snowpiercer is directed by one of my favorite directors, Bong Joon-ho. And like, if you've seen Parasite, it's one of my top probably 20 movies ever. And yet it's not really sci-fi, so I couldn't put it on this list. The Host was good, although maybe it should be on the list. Anyway, but Snowpiercer is just not good. I just didn't like it. And I've watched it twice now. And even when you don't watch it and say, like, this is a realistic adventure of people on a train that is going around the world, and you go like, none of this makes any sense. Like, none of this holds together. And you go, you know what? I'm not going to try and make sense of this. I'm going to say this movie is a metaphor, and hold it in your brain that this is just a metaphor that you're watching. It's still not good. I just didn't like it. So Snowpiercer does not make my list of my top 100 sci-fi movies. All right. I'll probably give you an update in a couple months when I've sort of done a whole bunch more of my sort of double checking and verifying my movie list is still high quality. But if you want the list, it's down in the show notes, as well as the link to my favorite television shows of all time. All right. We'll see you next week.